Gentleman he has worked with companies like Siemens and Tata in a lot of management positions. More importantly for us, today's discussion would be he has a lot of interest in the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals and a lot of design issues that come along with these. So welcome you on board, sir. Welcome, M.N. Rao, sir. Thank you for connecting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me introduce Mr. Balaji Channakrishnan. Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Balaji Channakrishnan, sir, comes from the oil and gas domain. Indeed, one of the hot cakes today, apart from information technology and machine learning, etc., domains of choice. He is the founder of Telstra Energy Private Limited, which he founded in Singapore and then shifted back to Coimbatore and has an office here too. He started a small introduction for him. He started his career as a petroleum geologist, quite an interesting domain to work on, and comes up with around 20 years of work with companies like Petronas in Malaysia, in Kuwait with Kuwait Oil Company, Jubilant Energy, Reliance Industries, and even with Geo Services in Singapore. Thank you for joining, sir. Thank you, Balaji, sir, for joining. So indeed, as we see, we have a diverse audience here, and I hope that should have a real good value add. That is what we are going to look for today. So at the outset, I'll just give 2 minutes of opening remarks. Then I would probably roll the dice between the three speakers. My submission is the following. If you can give your small initial remarks for maybe 4 or 5 minutes first, just to set the tone rolling. And then we can have some questions that we see in the question answer box or some generic ones that we have already received. And then we'll get the ball rolling amongst all the three of you and your opinions and discussions on the same. So just to begin with, I think I'll start with the latest happenings first, considering what India did at GABA yesterday, coming back and fighting strong, and even what the Serum Institute of India and other pharmaceutical companies are doing, coming back and fighting hard. I think this is just happening because there is a lot of talent in India that we are very well aware of. There is a lot of technology push that we all are seeing. The only issue now stays back is the gap, if at all, that we find. And looking at the technologies going ahead, what would be happening in the 21st century, what all would be the key domain points that we'll have to look for, the research and development issues that we see here. And along with that, what would be the industry and the academic connect initiatives that we'll have to look through so that India definitely goes ahead, including the recent issues with China where technology was an issue and probably the government of India did take some proactive measures and there were some really good outcomes, and we again could show our mettle that some good work has been happening and will keep happening in India. So this is where we start the tone. We understand equally well the industry definitely adopts media and technology at a faster pace. But let me again say, academia usually is not at all behind. It's just probably one step behind. But can this 1 or 2 steps also be bridged up as much as possible so that we stay in sync? And looking at the basic role models and key achievements that many universities have been able to achieve with academic partnership and industry partnerships, let's see how we can do this together, and let's see how can this really benefit India as a whole and individual organizations, both academia and industry individually. So this is the opening remark from my side. Can I please shift over to Sri Balaji sir for his opening remarks, please? I would request the panelists to give small opening remarks for say 4 or 5 minutes initially so that we set the tone and then we can rotate amongst each other for the further discussions. I would hand it over to Balaji sir for his opening remarks, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, can you all hear me clear?
You are loud and clear, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon. I would like to thank IMC and the MIT World Peace University, the organizers of the event, and also the moderator who has put it very succinctly on the point of discussion in this event, and my co-panelist. This is indeed an interesting topic. What is the scope for new technology in R&D, especially in India, and what role industry and academia can play? So to start with, let's have a definition of what we actually mean by new technology. There are a number of definitions floating around. I would like to stick to one which is more relevant, which says any set of productive techniques that offers a significant improvement. The key is significant improvement over the established technology for a given process in a specific historical context. Just to give an example, think about how we used to do banking. We used to go to the banks and do the banking. Then we were doing net banking, checks. Now we are doing phone banking. And this is how the new technology evolves. And there is scopes for everyone to participate in this. So moving forward, I would like to touch base upon like what's happening, some of the key areas where the new technology is making rapid strides. So let's take about the energy industry. The energy industry has seen a sea change in way the R&D and the impact of the R&D that's been happening in the past couple of decades. Let's take e-mobility. Now there's so much of money and research and is being sent on like e-mobility, be it electric cars, mopeds, or scooters, or any form of mobility driven by this electrical energy. And this is one area where there is a lot of scope for new technology. There are some other areas in the energy spectra which is allied to the e-mobility concept. Let's say how you can improve the efficiency of the batteries. Now there is a lot of research that's happening in the battery technology, that now there are batteries available, like you can recharge them in like less than 10 minutes. The same time it takes you to go to a petrol station and fill up. And there's so much of other research happening in the energy industry. And the next one I would like to uh, cover is what's happening in the industries like robotics and drone technology. Now this is all pervasive, right from our day-to-day life and industry applications and defense and environment and so on and so forth. Even if you go to some weddings and marriages, you see the drones taking over the role of traditional cameraman. And um, it's not just technology now. You also see the impact of it in our day-to-day life, and like defense and how drones can play a major role in our defense and technology. And there are some innovations by a student from a Kerala college where they have invented a robot that can clean the sewers. I mean, that's saving the man from going into the sewers. That's fantastic things are happening. And now there is another area is space tech. Space tech covers a wide spectrum of areas of new technology. It includes spacecrafts, satellites, space stations, and support infrastructure and equipment. And more importantly, like space warfare, what we know is like fifth generation warfare. I mean, this is very critical. If you take the recent example of the warfare that's happening in Armenia, this is a combination of your robotic drone and space tech, which is the defining moment in how nations are like fighting and protecting themselves. But space tech needs a lot of new tools and techniques, and this can vary from weather forecasting, remote sensing, GPS, satellite television, communication. It's spread everywhere. So this is one area where a lot of interest is happening. And um, lucky to note that ISRO is promoting the space tech research in India in a long way, and for a longer period of time, private industry has not been involved in space tech, but that is changing for good. And some other areas like healthcare. Healthcare is awesome. Like the way things are changing in the healthcare, it's really nice. I remember like when I was a child, I watched this movie Star Trek, and in that movie, Dr. McCoy used a medical tricorder, like it's a kind of handheld device. He used the tricorder and scanned the patient. So the device would immediately list his vital signs and other parameters in diagnosis. This was a movie, but now that's becoming a reality now. So the point I'm trying to make here is like India needs all these technologies if it has to progress, eliminate poverty, and become self-reliant and become a superpower. So to relate to the topic, the scope really exists.
Yes, sir.
So that's the
Yes,
point I
sir.
want.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just take another minute.
Sure, sir.
So the second point I want to make is like, is there a role for industry and academia? Of course, there is a role for industry and academia. There is no doubt about that, no doubt about that. Because this technological revolution brings a lot of opportunities for both big and small companies across India and academic institutions. As our moderator has rightly pointed out, we have a vast potential of human resources who are capable, skilled, and raring to go, and that needs to be tapped. Uh, but if you see the real picture, the Indian industry spend on R&D is very, very low, very, very low. Except maybe you can exclude pharma or to certain extent automobile. The rest of the industries, the R&D spend is very low. Uh, from the academic research, there is an alignment, but still we feel a lot of industry focus is required. This needs a change of approach and working together for a common objective. Nevertheless, there are some pockets of excellence. Personally, I have seen the way IIT Madras Research Park is working. I mean, that's really
Hello,
nice.
sir. You there?
Yeah, I'm there. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just concluding my introductory talk saying there are some pockets of excellence. Recently, I've been to IIT Madras Research Park. The kind of work they do is really nice. And some of the e-mobility companies like this Ather, which has been incubated in IIT Madras, that's great. I think this is just the beginning. I think there is a lot more to come. And with that, I thank for the initial introductory opportunity. I hand it over to Mr. Mangesh to take it further.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Balaji, for an opening remarks. We understand, yes, 2-3 key points that we can pick up from here that we'll use for the discussions definitely will be the technologies that you mentioned. Yes, really, they are hot in domain. The role that industry and academia can play according to new technologies. And definitely the key point that you rightly mentioned, the spend that we have on R&D is pretty constrained. So what can be done to probably mobilize that further ahead? Thank you so much, sir, for your initial remarks. We'll come back to this definitely. Next, I would request Mr. Karthik Kittu. Karthik, sir, can you please, so that we look at an academic angle first, and then again, I'll come back to Rao, sir, for the industry angle, so that we have both of these taken together. So, Karthik Kittu, sir, for your opening remarks, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Mangeshji, and thanks to IMC and MIT World University. I think I echo some of the points that my fellow panelist Balaji spoke about. If you look at a lot of things, the industry academia connect in many places might not be so good or well. I mean, that's one of the key reasons why we have lesser startups. But more or less that's increasing now, and the trend has changed. And even the age factor and all that constraint, like you said in India. I mean, all that is getting lower. Younger people are coming up in many leadership positions. And as you said, I mean, 5 years ago, I was nominated on the Prime Minister's Committee, and also, I've been at the White House in 2018 as a White House invitee on on startups. So keeping a few things that Balaji spoke in mind, of course, I was reading an article from the US during the pandemic. They wrote out millions of checks, but India was the only country that clicked a button and said, "Hey, we have a beam and money is there." So that's our answer, right? And from my younger days, when someone had asked me that, hey, are you from the land of snake charmers? I said, we even do that intelligently at the click of a button, so that's how we have taken it. And hot sectors, of course, healthcare, education, agri, financial inclusion. I've looked at a few startups who are filing taxi returns for cab drivers as a specialist sector. Of course, financial inclusion at the bottom of the pyramid, I mean, is very important. And be it infrastructure, and my colleague was talking about clean tech and clean energy. I mean, these are very important sectors that we have all forayed into, and as we call the new age technologies. And we were talking of drones. So when the pandemic set in, all of us thought we cannot run what we are running. But technology has enabled us so much that we ran what we ran sitting at home or sitting far away. So 25th was the lockdown, and I remember 28th getting a call from the state government that would you like to volunteer in the technology team to build the dashboard? And I said, why not? This is the once in a lifetime opportunity. So I was on the chief minister's war room on COVID from day 3, and though my family and a lot of members didn't want me there, I mean, I saw happenings from day 3. And
Great.
we built the dashboard for the government. I can proudly say I was part of the team that built the COVID dashboard in 3 days. So from 28th, 3 sleepless nights, I remember. End of the month, we had the COVID dashboard up for the government. And I know a lot of stakeholders that came in, industry, academia. In fact, there was one video that was featured on the national by our national joint secretary, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, that how in Bengaluru's war room, industry, academia, then the police, then our traffic wardens, and even our civil defense, all of us got together irrespective of what we did. I can share that with everyone to see on how we battled COVID-19 in the state of Karnataka. It was showed as an example to all over India. So as I said, where there is a will, there is a way. And a few highlights where our director, Professor Sadagopan, always says, I just give you a small perspective of Bangalore and its innovation ecosystem. There is Indian Institute of Science, there is Indian Institute of Management Bangalore, IIIT Bangalore, PSIT, Derby, all of us. So for example, IISc, IIMB and us work together on the innovation ecosystem. And our innovation center was born in 1999. Sorry, in 2009, and the institute was started in 99. So we work very closely with the industry. There might, as I said, there might be some gaps in a few universities, but we still keep working with many corporates. We're fortunate to be in Electronic City right across Infosys, and we work with Emphasis gives us a couple of grants, Emphasis, Fidelity. We work with Samsung. So if you ask me, we have utilized this very well. Small points before I hand it over to you is for increased scope in R&D, we must increase our thoughts to give our young students the opportunity to pursue entrepreneurship. Indian parental mentality is join a great master's institute, do a great master's, get a job in an MNC, then get married, have a family, and the cycle goes on and on. You need to break the chain and tell the kids, hey, you don't be a job seeker, be a job creator. And I've done that. I mean, might be 38. I've kept on telling our younger generation to do that. And it's only then that philanthropy to university increases. Imagine an alumni, if he's an employee, he can give X amount. But if he is a job creator, he can give 10x or 100x the amount. That should be our aim. Our research parks in our universities should be, converted to calling them entrepreneurship parks. So the industry, the academia, so the professors, the young entrepreneurs and the industry work together. And where is there scope for making some money? There is licensing and few other things. And to close, many of our universities have a lot of land banks, right? It's time to convert some part of your greenery and land banks into some buildings and have the greenery inside the buildings. And that would become an asset to start these factories and to start a lot of companies. So on that note, I think I would give it back to you, sir, and thank you.
Thank you, Karthik, sir. Thank you for highlighting two key keystone areas that you rightly mentioned, where you said very truly that you were a part of an industry academia partnership while you built the dashboard for Bangalore during COVID-19 situation by end of March itself. That's an interesting observation, and some interesting key points that you rightly mentioned, that these generations have changed. Yes, it is not like what it was earlier. The younger generations are ready to take a little challenge, and the ease of doing business, as if I would say today, and the ecosystem that we have with technology at the root place is available, where we should really be able to support and encourage youngsters to look at job givers, as you very correctly mentioned, than job seekers. No MNC, let the MNC take over your startup. Probably that should be an ideology, so that they make a good stake in it and actually make millions, but not just peanuts, as we would say otherwise, as salaries.
Just to add on to that point, at Stanford, when I visited, so I never had the opportunity to study. So when I went there, I went to the Phil J. Knight Center for Management Studies. It rings a bell in my ears. So Phil Knight was the founder of Nike, and he has given back so much to Stanford just because what Stanford gave him. So the dream is that our own alumni should give it back to their own institutions. I remember one man called B.V. Jagdish, he's in the Valley. I mean, you won't believe he has donated, I think, close to 20 crores to a corporation school in one area because he was from that corporation school. I mean, that is history.
Great.
So that should be our.
Yes. There are really some case models and role models that we can look forward to. True. Thank you, Karthik sir. Thank you. Now I would request Mr. M.N. Rao to give his opening remarks. There are two very key points that I would like to mention that Mr. M.N. Rao can bring to the discussion. One is the design angle, and second is the sustainability goals that we can go ahead so that we make this new technology front available for industry and academia more sustainable, both from a local perspective, a community perspective, a state or a government or India perspective, and eventually what United Nations eventually says in its UNDP program about the UNDG status and look at sustainability. Mr. M.N. Rao, please, for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So, instinctively, I would turn to the other dimension of collaboration between industry and academia. So much of this is our natural valency is to look at science and technology. My natural valency is to look at innovations in design of operating models and commercial models, application innovations, and therefore regulatory rework and institutional design. Because I see that a lot of wealth creation, flow of capital, the startup ecosystem is fueled by model innovation as opposed to something which is purely in the realm of pure science research or tech advancement. And the mindset needed for innovation, which isn't necessarily tech advancement in a more narrow sense, but the novel applications of that. I would say that there are two critical preconditions to it, and one is a deeper sense of what our biggest problems are. I start by saying that our biggest problems must get the attention of our best minds, and the best minds in science and technology and innovation. So because then you start reworking and say that, what do I need to redesign? How will institutional design change? What regulatory environment or ecosystem must I have to be able to drive capital investments into those areas? Who do I collaborate with? Because collaboration again is a very critical mindset. It's very humbling because it's not who wins, but it's what wins. It's a collective wins. It's not the individual who takes away the spoils of victory, but it's the collective that wins in an environment like that. So collaboration is so central to winning, to application innovation, to model innovation, and to model redesign. That this is what is required. And I think that more than capital flow into R&D, capital flow into innovation will change the dynamics of growth. So just to make that little remark as a starting point, because many places we have to shed orthodoxy of every kind in order that innovation happens. Educational institutions have to shed a lot of orthodoxy because they are very, very orthodox, exceptionally, in a sense, inward looking. I'm not picking up any particular institution, but in general terms, they respond to deep change very differently. So there is a lot of that. So if you want to encourage, for instance, entrepreneurship, would you permit people who have an option to become entrepreneurs in the final year of their MBA or a MTech or a BTech, but if they don't succeed, they come back with invaluable experience at the end of 2 years, go through a small bridge program and re-enter placement of the university. Do something like that, which changes the dynamic of it. So it's always the model design which I found as a big magnet for capital, as opposed to merely advancement in technology terms. So with that opening remark, I would stop here. I think many other points have been covered adequately by Professor Kittu and Mr. Balaji. Then we will talk about, as we go along, whatever else is of interest to the audience. Okay, that's it. You're on mute, Dr. Bedekar.
Yeah. So very rightly said by you, Mr. Rao, that students should be given a choice to look at entrepreneurship either in the final year or so on. I would just like to bring to your notice, maybe you know this very well, that in the new education policy that is the government of India is floating with, this has been formally worded by the UGC and the AICT approved. That
Dr. Bedekar, the only point I wanted to make is that if you went out and you tried your hand at entrepreneurship, corporate sponsorship to me would be the seed money, the sustenance money, the minimum that you need to keep body and soul together for a year or 2 years to be paid to them. And I would value failure, because if they didn't do well, I'd like to bring them back and put them through the placement service. So if I know that defenses are possible, that I have something to fall back upon, then I know that I'm more open to the idea of going out and trying something. There's no social stigma associated with failure. So I come back to the placement service. So everywhere we have to innovate with the options open to people for us to succeed, I'm saying. That's all.
Correct.
Mr. Rao, just to add on, so before this was implemented from the last 1 year, we have this policy implemented at IIIT Bengaluru that you can do entrepreneurship and you can also attend for the placement season the following year if it didn't do well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. That's great to hear that.
That's really nice, Mr. Karthik.
Took the stand 2 years ago, and it finally got implemented last year. Very proudly say. I know it took a lot of time, but even the board of governors agreed.
Yes, of course. That's lovely. Very happy to hear that, actually.
In fact, Mr. Rao and Mr. Karthik and Mr. Balaji, just for your information, it's the same situation here at MIT WPU at Kothurud, Pune. In case the startup goes flying colors, great. They are on their own and they are job creators, as Mr. Karthik rightly put. But in case, as Mr. Rao rightly put, that in case it bombs out, that's perfectly fair. We understand success ratios are too small in numbers. They are countable on fingers. But then we are perfectly and fine. I mean, really, as you very correctly put, the experience that they generate out of this is immense. And in case they do not get into flying, we are perfectly fine. They can come back, finish some academics if that's pending, get into the academic placements process, etc., and go ahead. This is perfectly fine, sir. In fact, I would like to even have a small submission that many academic institutions, especially private players and autonomous universities, probably they have more flexibility in doing this, and many of them have already been doing this. That's really interesting to look at, surely. And I also appreciate a key point that Mr. Rao, you mentioned. Yes, there is a little inertia that was there. I would use the word was there. Maybe Mr. Karthik can agree to this. Yes, initially there was a little inertia, but of late, I mean, not just saying 1 or 2 universities, many universities have been becoming lean. They are going to go flexible. They are giving these options to students. And it has even been formally worded, as I said a little while ago, in the national education policy also. So we hope this inertia will reduce down and we get the dynamism that you otherwise were indicating. Truly acceptable and understandable. I would want to drive this ahead on 2 small points. I would start with Mr. Balaji on some 2 definitions that you initially started with. And with the 3 opening remarks that I could see, healthcare happens to be a common point that nearly many of you mentioned. And even the current COVID situation, probably healthcare becomes critical issues. And Mr. Balaji can give his thoughts on how he would want to look ahead. And Mr. M.N. Rao, working in a systems, probably has a definite connect to this. And Karthik sir also mentioned that healthcare also tops one of the basic domains in which there are entrepreneurs and startups that has been generated at IIT Bangalore. So probably I would start with Balaji sir on this. What are your thoughts on looking at healthcare as a startup with new technology majorly and the R&D that goes into it? What are your thoughts on your experiences in working with academia predominantly?
Okay, absolutely, Dr. Bedkar. I mean, this is an experience we had when we were about to start Telestor Energy. So Obviously, there is no connection between oil and gas and healthcare.
Yes.
It would appear so. Like in oil and gas, even though a lot of technology is involved, still some of the workflow and processes and approaches are very conventional.
Correct.
That's probably one reason why I went ahead and started Telesto Energy to bring in a new technology in the way we do business. So in that process, we were talking to some companies that were based in Harvard Innovation Lab. They are one of our partners, technology partners. So we had a number of discussions, and even this is way back in 2015. Even at that time, like there is a lot of buzz that's happening when it comes to healthcare and medical technology, and especially they were telling stories like how AI is going to change the way the patients are being treated. Now, if you were to go to a doctor, the doctor may be having an experience of identifying symptoms and doing the diagnosis based on his personal experience or maybe experience from his network of colleagues. If you were to digitize all that information and put them as a record and run it, so there were some experiments being conducted at that point of time, 4 or 5 years back, where the accuracy levels were even close to 70-80%. So that's when I realized there is a lot of potential in healthcare. But coming back to an Indian context, if you see the healthcare is primarily concentrated on the big cities, and the access to healthcare is very limited when you go to the rural areas or remote regions. And this is where the technology and the communication and everything can come together and provide easy access of healthcare and treatments. And this COVID has really accelerated this process. And now, if you see, there are e-clinics where consultations happening over remotely, and there is a seamless access of patient to doctor connectivity, and there is a lot of things being done with lesser effort than usually before. Remember, even now, if you go to a hospital, the time you spend talking to a doctor is maybe 10% of the time you are going to spending in the hospital. I mean, these are like simple things, day-to-day innovations, which can be easily done. And from Telesto's point of view, we also interact a lot with some of the big institutions in India, and we take a lot of internship and talk to the students. And some of the students are really bright. Like you give them a problem and they can solve it. I mean, the problem solving is very easy for them. Like, but for them, the intricacies of like setting up a company or a startup, and I know like sales and those and fundraising, those areas are the handicaps.
True.
And if all this can be bring together, I think healthcare is for a great boom in India, especially the technology investment in healthcare.
And even probably the mass population that we have here and the age group that we ideally look for, probably that's one more driving factor for getting good business there. Karthik sir, I would go to you and look at your inputs on these points when you were shifting towards the dashboard in Bangalore. What were the academia partnerships and what technologies, if you can just highlight on, so that we can drive the discussion ahead, and based on your experience, and we have the other two gentlemen as panelists also then.
Sure. So just to give you a perspective, Bangalore is home to about 800 plus colleges.
Yes.
Out of which 100 plus are engineering colleges. And some key institutions that I said, IIIT, IISc, IIM, and PSIT, and 90,000 plus engineering sort of graduate every year. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the number of patents held by these, by the startups or by the institutions, about it's less, 56. A number of startups that have emerged, I think, is about 800 plus. And, of course, deep research about, handful, 30, 40.
Okay.
But what now I think the student mindset is changing is that now they're realizing that the entrepreneurial mindset is kicking in.
Yes.
Maybe looking at the other, what do I say, other countries and things. I mean, we always used to maybe look at the US as the entrepreneurial hub. But if you look at the recent report, the top 5 cities, Bengaluru is maybe leading the city above London or Israel or others. So the whole thought process has come to a paradigm shift that entrepreneurship can be forward. And some of our institutions, with the Ministry of Electronics and IT, I mean, if you're looking at government, so they have established their group 2 and group 3 centers and group 1 centers, and they're supporting entrepreneurship. For the first time, for a final year kid, we give a grant of say 4 lakh rupees, and they build a prototype, and the professors handhold them, and we have key industry people advising them. So in the older times, maybe when even I was studying, things like those were lacking. You wanted to do entrepreneurship. One is, like you said, the societal pressures. I mean, parents and family. See, I know, I mean, many people are around here. So I have a favorite statement when I talk to the students. My degree is for the Bagal ka Gar ka auntie, right? Because my mom wants to tell out there that, hey, my son's got a job in this company, that company. So that was what mattered. But today's mothers, I think, are changing. They can say, hey, mere beta ne, itna employment generate kiya. So it should, I love to talk to all the parents and tell them, hey, this is the mindset. So it's with the mindset, which is the paradigm shift. And if you look at the other things from the government, for example, for some of the fees that the universities charge, UGC should not be like putting norms and telling them, penalizing them and telling them, hey, look, you're doing this. Maybe the some of these things and the CSR spent from a lot of companies that we also get, that should be used, in telling these, in making these kind of, projects happen. So, for example, be it agri-tech, and we were talking of drones. We recently had a session at the Bengaluru Tech Summit between Dr. Kota Harinarana, who's the chief designer of the LCA, and our director, Professor Sargopan, who spoke of drones, like you said, in healthcare, who spoke drones in agri. So drones in agri is to just, for example, spray pesticides. But for drones in healthcare, I mean, we have a Bangalore Bioinnovation Center here and the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences. So what COVID did is brought these 5 institutions together: Rajiv Gandhi University, IIM, ISC, Bangalore. We did a COVID challenge, and you believe me, maybe there is something that the medical fraternity understands. So carrying test samples or blood report samples in Bengaluru traffic to the main lab is difficult. Yes. So why don't we use drones, put these samples, and it's just airlifted? And the government is telling they'll give us a corridor to experiment, maybe, for example, one area, Koramangala Electronic City. I mean, if this happens, I mean, that's a radical shift even for the entire fraternity, right? So things like these might definitely help. It's the mindset shift that, like, even Mr. Rao was telling and Mr. Balaji were telling. I mean, if you can get that together, and all these partnerships, like you said, the older thought was, I will do it alone. I mean, now the new thought is, we will do it together. And if all the institutions come together, see, if you look at one Harvard, they have every department in the university. But in India, it's not the case. We have technology universities separate, medical universities separate, management universities separate, and deep research separate. Yes. If all these guys come together, then, I think we would be the most formidable, promising force. And my humble request is to all the educationists out here, try this. And if you give college projects, we have 5 management students together, we have 5 BCom students together, or 5 engineering students together. My humble, submission is, make the BCom guy write the financial plan. Make the management student write the management plan. Let the tech guys only do coding. If you tell a tech guy to write a business plan, he will be confused. So can all our universities do projects like this together? When we do this, put 5 students of different cadres, it will work magic. So
sure. Thank you, Mr. Karthik, for this. I'll go to Mr. Rao on his comments on healthcare sector and the technologies that he has seen in the last couple of years, and how did COVID affect it, and maybe his thoughts on design issues with healthcare devices these days.
I'm not in the devices market, though I know a fair bit. I've worked in the Siemens company a long time.
Yes.
But I do know that there are a few things that can work to our advantage. We are a young nation.
Yes.
And morbidity of many kinds is a feature of age. So therefore, we have a natural advantage. If you're sensible, If you have tax incentivized savings right from the very early years to put money away into bank accounts that can pay for old age. So insurance, there is an enormous, in taxation, there is innovation possibility. If you think about, we still spend 3.5% of GDP on healthcare, and it won't work. It is woefully inadequate if we do not do more on screening, surveillance, preventive care, wellness. Our whole orientation must move from only, tertiary care, which is very nice to talk about, very cerebral to talk about. But the reality of the matter is that the society's return on capital invested is actually very high when you put some dollars into prevention, into wellness, into areas of that nature. So there are mega shifts. Also, the application of ICT in consultation in multiple areas. So the manner in which we produce cheap drugs, so the Janaushadhi schemes and things like that, which we haven't done much about. So we haven't innovated enough on warehousing, freight forwarding, distribution, and making use of our limited capacities to manufacture and distribute more than manufacturers, warehousing and distribution. We have plenty of manufacturing. So in all of those areas, there are enormous opportunities. We don't have to discover new molecules. We have enough already to be able to do a ton of good work in the country. My world in the last few years has been restricted to education, which is the mother of all scandals. Wherever we go, there are no teachers. We hoodwink the regulators. We do crazy things in the name of education. And so we have generations of youngsters coming out who are not qualified to be health workers or doctors. This is the reality. But capacity expansion is relentless. We are admitting 65,000 students today. 15 years ago, we were admitting 20,000. And by 2025, we'll admit 100,000. Now, if you have a single exit examination, you make entry easy, you increase capacities, more admissions into existing schools. You also increase number of schools like there's no tomorrow. But you have one exit examination coming called next in 2022. Whether you're SC, ST, BC, your father wrote a big check and you found entry, you still have to pass the same exam like a CA.
Yes.
Entry is easy. Exit is the same hurdle. So what are you going to do? You don't have teachers to do basic sciences. You don't have any teacher available to do clinical subjects. What do you intend to do? So how do you innovatively apply technology to harness telecom, to harness, innovate, to unearth clinical cases, abundance, no? Yes. We don't have the same kind of privacy laws as they have in the West. So what can you do to harness those? You see, today's generation does not have the right pedagogy. People see and learn, people interact and learn, people deliberate and learn, people just don't read and learn. You can't throw a 5-inch thick book to students who come from a Mofussil area. We have indulged in language jingoism for a long time. Yes. So they don't teach English. Now you bring the kid from some corner, Adilabad, some corner of Telangana, comes into Hyderabad city, and you put him in a school, medical school, you give him 5 books, each is 4-inch thick, and you read chaste English narrative, 20 pages of it, to imagine something that a 2D animation can do a far better job. Yes. Right? You can create online platforms. So I'm saying that let's not be seduced by what technology can do. Let's learn to use model and design innovation that will help us harness what we already have and apply it in novel ways to solve pressing problems, not grand old problems. I'm saying that how do you solve pressing today's problems, right? That's where I am. All right.
So I'll come back to Karthik sir for a change for a minute and then ask him about what are the technologies that he has been looking at applying today to these problems that Mr. Rao mentioned and also Mr. Balaji mentioned, predominantly on education or on healthcare or e-mobility, drones, robots. I mean, there is a bulk of spectrum that we're looking for. In fact, even I hope you might have seen the Gartner hype cycle and the technology maturity that they have predicted. There is a ton that's happening.
Only one quick remark before Professor Karthik gets in.
Go on.
Don't say, let me innovate now that I have a drone.
No.
Hang on, just a second. That's the craziest idea I have ever come across. So you have to solve, is there a problem there?
Yes.
Is there somebody suffering? And did we unearth enough of that? We can't work from technology to solve problem. You have to come from the problem to see what technologies make sense, not the
Correct.
other way around. Right? That's
Correct.
ridiculous. Okay, sorry,
That,
go ahead now.
that is why I came back to Karthik sir, because he has some recent experience in March of 2020 looking at problem solving and then using technology to solve problem, as you rightly mentioned. We are
Yes.
not here because we have a drone now, find a solution and use the drone.
I'm exaggerating, but
I
don't
understand.
take me too seriously. I'm sorry, just to drive home a point.
True, true.
Right? Yeah.
And that is why I came back to Karthik sir for a basic reason.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Karthik had just been, as he rightly mentioned, he
Yes,
was a
yes.
part of one of the problem areas, and he
Yes,
probably must have
yes,
used some
yes.
technologies there. So that
Yeah.
is why I thought I'll come back to Karthik sir first.
Please, certainly. No, don't mind my saying this at all, Mr. Pedika. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, Mr. Karthik, please.
Sure. So, of course. So, one thing that we learned out of for example, being in the war room is the understanding of technology for someone at various levels in the government and various departments is different. That was my first understanding, because I had to deal, for example, with the Ministry of Public Information. Then we had to deal with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and we had to deal with the Bangalore City Corporation or the BBMP, and there were two war rooms. And then you add in a bunch of technologists, you add in a bunch of professors, and then we add in a bunch of civil defense dudes, and then you get the traffic wardens who are there on the road. Everyone wants to help, and they came in and like, sir, I have an idea. So I would say the first technology that we used is people management.
Oh, great.
First
Great.
technology, use people management, take all the inputs, but use whatever input used to work at that time. Yeah, we had a couple of brilliant IAS officers and their understanding of technology. And so, what we put together first was a very simple dashboard. Everyone said, for example, let's use WordPress. I have a couple of PHP developers. I know someone with C#. But we said, what's the best way to first get the system up, to first do a basic design,
Correct.
and then we can add all the masala. So I would say, first thing is make a system that would maybe send SMS notification to people and others that, hey, look what, you are in safe zone, you are in unsafe zone. And, everyone thought that during the lockdown, you had to wear masks and you were going out, you will get affected. But I'll give you a simple stigma. I mean, the first 15, 20 days or 1 month was the easiest, because there was no one on the road, and you had to go to your workplace, you go through a few checkings, you come back. But when there were cases that were spreading, that's where you had to, for example, in one of the videos I said, so how was it mapped? It was first mapped at the taluka level or a village level, then the taluka level, then it comes to the district headquarters. They look at the information and they send it out to headquarters, right? So, of course, it was a mix of back-end technologies. I mean, if you want to get into coding part, I mean, because it's general audience, so definitely. But when you look at solving that problem, I would say taking in the best and looking at some analytics and new decision structures that technology has to offer. And suddenly video conferencing became important. Of course, Zoom and everything that we're using, we are also on it. I mean, a lot of people, so I also come from the security field before this. I would say, I mean, people had 100 concerns of using Zoom, but I mean, Zoom is the new normal now. I mean, right? So I remember getting to conferences, and if you had to get to a speaker, you go take a selfie, or you say, I wanted to stand next to my role model, Chris Krishnan, or anyone else. But now I said, turn the phone, look at the screen, take a selfie. It's the new norm, because that is equally accepted, because you are participating from your home and I am sitting in my home or my office and delivering this. Of course, next, automation, robotics, and factories. I mean, we were talking a lot of automation, and I remember a couple of companies who into the prime COVID wards they were sending in robots. So I think there was one innovative company in Bangalore, and one of the innovators' name also coincidentally was Balaji. I mean, Invento Robotics or something. So they made robots that can take things into the wards and come out.
Yes.
Right. So
instead of the compounder, you had robots going in. Right.
Of course.
Yes.
And adoption of virtual and augmented reality technologies. Yes. I mean, now maybe an X-ray. So if you look at the new Apple Watch, they can give you the blood oxygen levels or an oximeter, right? I mean, oximeter suddenly became important to look at your oxygen levels. right? And of course, one of the biggest things that we did in the war room was conversational systems. I mean, these chatbots and assistants suddenly became very important. Some of them were on auto program. I remember Telegram groups that had 16,000, 18,000 people and everyone floating in views. We just use technology to fetch a few keywords and analyze them. So chatbots became important. And to close with, of course, information security, because protecting customer data or business data or protecting data becomes paramount importance. Like there are many productivity tools. Suddenly this WhatsApp rage is there, but haven't we seen that if you do a few clicks on Gmail, for example,
Yes.
all our data is there and we are
Yes,
not
it's
looking at
already
it.
there.
Suddenly Facebook policy became important. But if I'm using a CRED or any other app, it gives you smart reminders of statements. I mean, how can it give you smart reminders? Someone recently came to us like, sir, we are trying to work on a smart fridge. When milk is over in your fridge, we'll let you know.
Yes.
I mean, I was telling my mom, I said, I mean, I think you guys will forget even my phone number. Because everything is on the mobile phone. Olden times, we used to remember 50 phone numbers, and that was our memory. I remember remembering landlines, but our memory is shorter.
Okay.
When
Great.
technology increases, human brain capacity, I think, maybe decrease, right? So, how do we get that increasing is the next question. And how do you secure? So, we were talking of information security for devices, but if it is stored here, I mean, there is no information security, right? It's human security.
Yes.
And we write down our traditional way of still using pen and paper.
Same here. Even I am using one.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Karthik. I'll go to Mr. Balaji now for his thoughts on what he rightly mentioned on the e-vehicles, e-mobility issues, and Mr. Balaji's thoughts on new technologies that he might have seen adopting maybe in his company directly or wherever he has seen partnering with academics, and what are the technology domains that he has seen working off late. Mr. Balaji, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bedekar. I would like to highlight a couple of points that's been raised by my co-panelist, Mr. Rao and Mr. Karthik. And Mr. Rao rightly mentioned it's a problem that's the key. The technology is only an enabler to solve a particular problem. This is something very important to remember because people lose sight of it because people are excited about technology, but it's not the technology that's really the thing. Like what problem you are trying to solve using the technology. So this is one point that we have personally faced in our development of some of the solutions for oil and gas. And also like Mr. Karthik mentioned on the use of drones in technology. I mean, it's interesting, like transporting medicines and letting the drones go to the ICU rooms. I mean, it's really nice. I mean, like imagine going to an hospital during the COVID period and getting a checkup. I mean, that itself has been a challenge. And what happens to the people who need serious attention? I mean, this is some of the points that I want to highlight because I want to drive my attention on like how do we apply this technology, be it any areas, right? Not necessarily healthcare or nowadays the boundaries are sort of blurring. The same technology is used in multiple areas. So like especially I'll tell a couple of examples from oil and gas because I don't know whether anybody will speak on oil and gas, so I want to bring those examples. One is something what we call like virtual reality and augmented reality. Yes. And especially it's very critical in oil and gas. If you see, most of the infrastructure is remote. Yes. Not only remote, some of the infrastructure is offshore. Yes. So now, like in the past, there were like times when I remember having to wait for a technician to come from Houston to, like service and equipment. But now, like most of the companies have invested heavily on what you call digital twins. Digital twins. And yes. So it's enabling people to solve most of the critical industry problems. That's one area. And the second is there is a connect. There is a connect between the healthcare technology and oil and gas, that's something I would like to bring here. Everybody has seen how like MRI works, most of the hospitals have a MRI machines. So basically the MRI detects the fluid content in your body and maps what we call as a relaxation time, like how much time it takes for this nuclear magnetic waves to travel and come back. So this technology is being used in oil and gas. We are running tools that go deep inside the oil well and scan the surrounding of the rock, and the surrounding of the rock, and scanning and telling like where is actually the fluid. Is the fluid actually is water, or is there is some oil in it, or there is some gas in it? So the key thing I want to drive it is like technology is an enabler, but how do you want to use it is entirely up to you. So that's where the clarity in defining the problem that we want to solve and why we want to solve it, and what is the reason, like does it really have an impact? Like if you see, there are like thousands and thousands of problems that can be solved, but do we solve all those problems? And we have to be selective, and there has to be a reason for it, and then we talk about technology. Like that's how I would look at this. That's my perspective.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Berry.
Sure. Thank you. Going ahead, we definitely have been put down. I just put down, I mean, I'm using a sheet of paper, putting down points, as Mr. Karthik rightly mentioned. But then I would see some common points here is augmented reality, virtual reality as technology enablers coming in, robots coming in, drones coming in, etc., etc. Now we would come to the other point that I could see in the discussion between all the three of you was predominantly on the investments or the cash flow and the money that is going into the R&D for these new technologies. We understand that cash flow is going to be tough for everybody considering the COVID situation. I hope all of us can understand that industry also have been in a tight situation. So channels through which we would look at funding coming in, ideally for technology demonstration programs or for technology in research and development, both from an academic perspective. To start commenting would be is academics can very well come in with the manpower and the technology know-how and the young minds to work on, brilliant minds getting good ideas. But then we also have to look at a proof of concept type of implementation where Mr. Karthik mentioned that the success rates are less. We all understand. But the company also wants to experiment with new technologies and try adopt them in multiple domains and situations. Are you looking at a private industry infusion into R&D in the coming few days or weeks, months time? Or are we going to look at, again, government, wait till the government comes in and puts in money into R&D as they have been putting money probably at every place these days? And do you foresee, I would go to Mr. Balaji to start with this time, is to try understand how would private companies or private enterprises or startups would come in and put money to look at technology solutions for everyday problems, please. The cash flow and the money and the spend on R&D on new technologies, please.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Badekar. That's a very, very relevant point that you raised. I will split this into like 2, 3 areas. One is to address your question. Are there private research funding that is being done? Or like the answer is absolutely yes. But now that's the catch. So now if you go all around in India, you will see most of the funding has come from the MNCs.
Yes.
Like I've been to some of these research parks which are attached to the academics, also like separate funding. You see most of the research funding comes from the MNCs. Like to give you an example, some of the thing from the oil and gas. Now, maybe you all know that Shell has a technology center in Bengaluru, and they have a technology center in Chennai. So what do they actually do? Like they not only support their activities globally, that's of course a number one outsourcing model, but there is also a lot of research that's happening in these areas, because now they have realized the potential of the manpower that's available in India, and what is lacking in the students that is coming out of from the institute is like what I call is a process-driven culture. Like Indians, we were so enamored by the jugaad culture, and some of us are very proud of it. I mean, that can solve the problem on a temporary basis, but jugaad is not a solution long time. Like that is why you see all this R&D is primarily process-driven. Research is a long and boring process. It's not something you get excited day in and day out. So it needs a process and very, very object oriented. So uh, that first question is, yes, there is a lot of funding that's coming for R&D in India, but primarily from the multinationals. And so does it benefit India? Of course it does, in terms of generating employment. It's one thing. But the major benefit is like it has created a lot of offshoots in terms of like auxiliary research, or not the primary one. There's a lot of small startups that come. So the second part I would like to ask is like the government funding. The government funding, like there are statistics available. Now, if you see in absolute numbers, the government funding has increased. But if you see, there are some other metrics that you can see how these numbers are like. If you look at the per capita basis, the numbers are like a very, very stagnant. Yes. And globally, if you see, to give an example, in 2019 alone, roughly about 2.3 to 2.4 trillion dollars were spent on research. More than 50% has come from the private companies, and most of it has gone into pharma, technology, automobile, because these are the areas where the companies see like are more profitable. So their research is more driven on profit. I mean, which is not bad, but which may not always be aligned with what is a societal goal.
Mr. Balaji, I would like to hold you for a minute. I'll go back to Mr. Rao for a minute and ask him how about, I mean, I am told that Mr. Rao is a little short on time. So I would probably take a 2-minute from him and ask him about his experience in funding, especially funding and research development going into the educational part of the story that he was talking about. Anything that you want to comment on this, sir?
Well, I mean, in a couple of quick general remarks on funding, not of R&D, but innovation and ventures, new ventures, and the startup ecosystem. R&D funding is only tax incentivized. Most of the world, governments only give tax incentives. You can get 3 times the investment as a tax write-off in your P&L. That's a different story. We are not. I'm not going into that. No, directly, rarely does government put money into R&D, excepting in defense, aerospace, and strategic or certain sectors of the world or the economy. Only they would put money in directly. So if you really go to see. What the government can actually do is to create a venture ecosystem which is conducive for new investment flows. And the most important of that is to direct a proportion of retirement funds, so 0.25%, let's say, goes into subscription to bonds issued by venture capital companies. Or you say that SLR funds from, you have SLR, CRR funds in money is set aside from your total time and demand liabilities inside a banking system. You put aside money into statutory liquidity ratio and CRR, into cash reserve ratios. Supposing the bond issuances that qualify for SLR include venture capital bonds, issued by recognizers. SIDBI issues something, IDBI issues something, new funds issue something, NABARD issues something, and they are subscribed from SLR funds. You can restrict it to 0.1%. 0.1% changes the ecosystem for investment. Unless you change that ecosystem for investment, now we are anyway taking enormous loan losses. Yes. Our entire public sector banks are awash in red. Now, what do you lose by putting another 1% into startup ecosystem only through subscription to bonds?
So if
so
I can,
so you have to, and you cannot give it to anyone who comes as an R&D and I'll also do some innovation. If you do not live in the problem long enough, if you're not deep enough in the problem, if you don't understand the problem, you have no qualification to get money.
Correct. Correct.
Right. So for that, it is not only technology that you should be reading, you should also read social sciences and liberal arts and something else, and literature perhaps, and not just this, because you have to have a big heart and you feel compelled to do something. And that's when you will end up doing it. Okay. So just my quick remark before I get on.
Yes.
So yeah.
Okay.
If you,
Thank you,
yeah,
Mr. Rao.
I need to step out at 1:15. I have a hard stop on that. So sorry about this.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mr. Balaji and Dr. Karthik, pleasure to have met you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rao.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Rao.
Mr.
Yeah.
Balaji,
Thank you.
now to talk ahead is, as Mr. Rao was mentioning, there has to be a very innovative thought process even for looking at the R&D that goes into innovation. So in your experience, Mr. Balaji, have you looked at any systems like this when you founded Telestro or your other, as you have, your CV rightly mentions that you are a director in multiple companies. Have you seen some different thought processes where funding into R&D has been channelized either directly or indirectly so that this eventually becomes sustainable? Because we also understand technology is a time being solution. I mean, there are new technologies coming in day in and day out. But for long lasting, probably we'll have to look at experimenting way ahead in time before it goes mainstream. And as even if we look at these hype cycles, which many consulting groups also give out year on year, every year probably. I mean, looking at the trend that we see right from inception to maturity to going downwards again, is how do you sustain this from an R&D funding perspective? Over to you, Mr. Balaji, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bedecker. That's a interesting and a long question, but see, the funding for R&D is extremely restricted in India. I mean, from an Indian context, I'm saying. Conventionally, it is not seen as a viable business. It's a overall mindset that's been prevailing. But fortunately, it's changing. Like I was going through some of the recent news where there are funding available for space tech startups in India. I mean, most of them come through still your angel investor or venture capitalist, and still predominantly, I would like to say these companies are not of Indian origin. So still, like most of the VCs and private equities, if you see like American and a lot of Chinese, but fortunately or unfortunately, like they have been restricted. So it could call for a mindset change. Whether that will happen sooner or later, it all depends on how these R&D ventures succeed. I mean, it's the visibility matters. Like when you see a couple of ventures succeed, then actually there is a pull, or it acts like a magnet, and there's more and more funding goes in that. Like so, there are a lot of things that can be done from a governmental level or from a private industry academia level.
We understand.
Like what we have been collaborating with something called a technology center in Houston. So the technology center in Houston, what they do is they are offshoot of like people from NASA and also people who are from the energy industry and also like people from the academia and the industry. So what they do is they try to get larger funding from philanthropists or like people who are like having a big heart to donate to R&D, and they try to bring in and support the smaller companies and help them to achieve this R&D innovation. So that's one way. Because for a smaller company to have access to a bigger infrastructure for doing R&D is very, very limited. So the second thing that the government can do is like the government can take a lot of expenditures that's incurred in running a day-to-day company, because running a company is also equally important when you do R&D, like because you need to keep the people motivated, pay them, like they also need the bonuses and increments and etc. So the government needs to see whether some innovative techniques can be applied to take care of part of the funding. Like I'll give an example of Singapore. Singapore, if you qualify for technology R&D, the government pays for 6 months salary of your employees. The only thing is you need to pay for the first 6 months. And the second 6 months they will pay as long as their what do you call the CPF contribution, like your PPF and all those things is paid. So that's sort of like taking away some of the burden. Second is there is a lot of support available for going to various events and conferences globally, and all these things are supported. Like these are some of the areas where government can come in.
Sure, sure, sure.
And I would also like to add one more point to what Mr. Rao has mentioned on 1% of the SLR and all those things.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
there is other way of looking at is, if you see most of the governments that are very successful in R&D and encouraging, they have a sort of semi-government investment arm that's been consistently investing in major companies across the globe.
Correct.
Do you know the Bharati Airtel was promoted by Temasek, which is a Singapore government owned company. Now Bharati Airtel has grown so big. I mean, this is just one example. I'm saying like there's a lot of companies being supported by all those Western or like developed countries investment arms. Government should think of something like that if they don't want to actually get into public money for funding like private research. These are some of the thoughts that are coming to me, especially on how we can address the funding needs of the R&D.
Sure. Thank you, Balaji sir, for those critical remarks on and 2 examples that you very correctly gave. I would go to Mr. Karthik now for 2 points again, considering his experience that he has with the startup ecosystem at IIT Bangalore. Are you looking at companies also being selective in funding technology startups differently? I mean, different technologies getting maybe a bias on fund, and maybe some technology is not getting the amount of funds that you would ideally look for? Or are you looking at investors putting similar amount of money in either of those technologies? Your experience about in the last couple of years.
So, see, some of the funds, I think, totally depend on the what the company wants to also work with, right? So I would first go back to the definition of an incubator and an accelerator for everyone.
Yes, yes.
Right. So an incubator, according to us, or the general definition, is where we incubate disruptive ideas with the hope of building out great businesses.
Correct.
Right. This can begin with companies or entrepreneurs in residence. With the kids. But an accelerator should actually accelerate the growth of an existing company. Right. Sort of, while an incubator matches young minds with the best ideas for sprouting, an accelerator is a greenhouse for startups. So if you look at it on that way, I mean, I first want to put on to a few government stuff. So if you look at the Ministry of HRD has called it the Ministry of Education now. And we have for the first time a institute innovation cell, and we have a chief innovation officer for the ministry. Right? Of course, I saw the IIC logo also on one of the posters.
Yes.
Right. So, and then there is the ARIA ranking, which is going to be made mandatory.
Correct.
Right. And here the Institute Innovation Council will serve as a bridge between the research pack, the TBI, the Technology Business Incubator, and various other things.
Correct.
Right. If you're looking at funding sources, AIM is there now. The government gives the Atal Innovation Mission irrespective of the tires.
Yes.
If you look at bio incubation, there is BIRAC. I mean, the Sustainable Entrepreneurship and Enterprise Development Fund. There is BioNest, which was launched by BIRAC.
Yes.
Right? Then there is the Nidhi TBI scheme. Of course, all this requires a lot of planning I'm just in the interest of people who are listening in. Then there is the TIDE 2.0 scheme, the Technology Innovation Development of Entrepreneurs scheme. So, and other part which I want to highlight and talk is, for example, we work very closely with GitHub. Now, Git has given us a special server, to put our codes and keep it, for example, secure. And if you're asking me of kind of different projects, like you said, that we have worked with, see, there are some very specific corporates which want to work on some specific areas.
Correct.
So, for example, there is one corporate who wanted to work with us in terms of heritage and preservation. And they said, look at selective startups in that domain.
Correct.
Another very important domain we work with a couple of corporates is the accessibility part, right? I mean, India as a market has ignored accessibility in terms of, be it with the hearing impaired, the visually impaired, and accessibility. So we have like 2 corporate partners who says, hey, I want to work on accessibility only, right?
Correct.
So we work with them. There's someone, a couple of them who want to solve some transport issues, some in digital forensics. Like we have one partner which I want to name, so who wants to, for example, only work on child trafficking and abuse,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So, and then there's education, and there are different things. So I would also say, when it comes to this R&D part, so some of them have some focus areas. I
Correct.
mean, it's best to align with them. If you're looking at private funds, it's best to align with them. And as I said, the government, for example, the Ministry of Electronics has given very clear-cut 6 focus areas. I mean, it's healthcare, it's education, it's agri-tech, it's financial inclusion, including digital payments, and it's infrastructure, it's clean tech, and it's clean energy. So
Yes.
as long as startups fall in these areas, they are good. But
Yes.
with the ongoing pandemic, everyone thinks, I can do something for healthcare. I mean, which is, everyone wants to, what is a sort of pie in the cake, which I say, sorry to say, is not the right way. I mean, if one person manufactures a smartwatch, everyone can't. One manufacturer, see, medical technology is very different, right? And a doctor's understanding of technology and a technologist's understanding of medicine. I mean, we were building an exo, for example, one of our flagship projects from 2-3 years is building an exoskeleton. I mean, there is a team of technologists, a team of doctors and neurosurgeons, scientists who work with this, and we have got clearance at demands. See, the dream is to, for example, make a platoon of paraplegic soldiers, people who are below the back paralyzed, walk on Rajpath and salute the national flag Jan 26, 2022. So, and this dream was sprouted in 2019. So, I mean, much before COVID. And phase wise, it was, showcased at various events. I mean, the thought of this gets goosebumps, but the amount of research, the amount of technology that goes behind is quite, different. And for example, the machine intelligence and robotics center of the state government of Karnataka rests with us. So, like Balaji was talking about the smart robot which was cleaning sewers or different things. We are looking at different things, that can solve communal issues and that can solve problems. So, if you're looking at it on that way, I would suggest it's best to go with the corporate or the government, and then partner and work with them.
Partner with them. That is how that would be better then. Okay, sure. I would invite Prasad Khandekar sir, who also happens to be the Dean of Faculty of Engineering Technology, and he has been involved in a lot of these projects that we do at an engineering level. So some quick thoughts on these points, sir.
So I think I was listening intensely to Balaji, Karthik, and Hemendra Rao sir. The points that they have brought are really valid. At this point, I would really love to listen to them rather than bringing my point.
Sure.
It's going fantastically. You're connecting these 3 dots very well, sir. So I'd like to listen to them intensely.
Sure, sir. Okay. We also have Mr. Praveen Patil, sir, who is the CEO of the CIAP team, who's actually looking at industry partnerships. So any input from Patil, sir, on these points, sir?
No, exactly what Dr. Khandekar said. I'm intensely listening to what
Okay,
they're
sure.
talking. And
I think then we'll continue with them. Another point that we could look at is predominantly on new technologies and how would they be adopted and what are the timelines that you would be looking at adoptions. So I would here first probably go to Mr. Karthik first to look at a timeline adoption on new technology front. Have you seen some patterns that you see of late on which technologies are being adopted early enough and which technologies you foresee, at least in the innovation sector and the industry institute partnership basis, which need some more time to mature, at least in the Indian scenario is what I would want to mean.
Sure. So I would want to start with a statement telling that, necessity is the mother of all.
Mother of invention. Okay.
Because if you ask my father, he didn't want to use a mobile phone, right?
True.
But the pandemic forced him to learn how to use Beam, right?
Correct.
And for the first time, for the Sabzi wala or anything else, now it's come to a point that the gas connection was refused to my father here, and he told, hey, you know what? I want to use this. Why? I said, why? He said, this guy is not giving me a gas connection if I'm not doing a Beam. He doesn't want to use cash.
Correct.
putting on that note, I mean, of course, if you're looking at, for example, let me give you a small example of blockchain, right? So blockchain is information is stored on various nodes, and we are talking of adopting blockchain in various technologies. For example, it'll be very easy to retrieve and more secure, but the point is how fast is the adoption, and really those kind of adoptions we cannot comment, right? It's left in the hand of many people, right? For
That
example,
is what, sir, Mr. That is what I really wanted to understand from you based on your experience with startups at ecosystem that you have at IIT Bangalore, because there are multiple technology solutions also available for probably the same set of problems also. So which are seeing the light of the day a little quicker, so that for the interest of the audience, they should also can look at some drive points about which technology should be predominantly targeted, at least in the short term run than the long term.
sure. So I would say again, see, blockchain in education certificates, for example, is seeing better light. But
Yeah.
blockchain in land records of birth and death certificates is not in our hand, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
technology versus the space,
Okay, yes.
right? So
Correct.
as you said, so if Amazon comes today and says, hey, you know, I'm going to fly a bunch of drones on top of Bangalore and deliver packages, or Swiggy says I'm experimenting on that, it's again the regulator's choice.
Correct.
Right. So wherein, as in industrial training, let me, you know, for example, we've seen companies, for example, in virtual reality for industrial training, for example, in construction companies, right? Or you use virtual reality, put up a headset, and you make them walk, and it gives you a feel of how it is. Well, that possible. I mean, virtual reality, augmented reality, all seeing the light. If you're looking at, for example, these stable booking systems cropped up, right? So so if you're asking me in that way, I would say augmented reality and virtual reality have seen the light. Now people are saying, for example, no, I mean, you have to wear a headset. I mean, it's COVID times, but maybe it's a passing phase, right?
Correct.
So if you're looking at that way, you're looking at some scanners. For example, one of these medical companies wanted to see if the heart rate is already measured, right? So can a hemoglobin index, for example, be measured using various technologies, non-invasive, right? So, or various kinds of like robotic, arms. Of course, backbone. Like today, there's an article again in the newspaper in Times of India in Bangalore by a director that a pure math and physics is the base to many things. So all of us are looking at applied things. So I come from a hardcore physics, maths, computer science first background. So I would say, mathematics is another key to develop our computation and capabilities. But how many of us, the question is, want to look at pure math? We want to look at applied math. We want to look at, you want to become the most amazing data scientist, but of course, to become a data scientist, there is a lot of mathematics. Maybe the top companies now are hiring people from the physics background and a mathematics background, right? Why is that? Because data sciences and decision sciences are based on these technologies, and of course, you must know. So, using the data, there is a way you use tools, R or many other tools are there. How you crunch the data, how you put them together to use them for decision sciences is also very important. So we're talking of artificial intelligence, but there should be like 1,000 data points to train the model. So I was talking to a few medical fraternity folks where we were talking, for example, of X-rays. So okay, if the AI model has to predict, you must at least feed in thousands of data points into it, right? So of course, AI in healthcare and AI in prediction modeling in various phases, I would say also is very, again, as I said, A is technology and B is how we apply, in which field we apply technology.
You said it, Mr. Karthik. True. I would go back to Mr. Balaji on 2 points that you currently touched based on is predominantly on robotics and AR, VR. Mr. Balaji also comes from an oil and gas platform, so probably even he would be in a good position to comment. And his exposure to industry as being director at multiple places, predominantly on these 2-3 technologies which are really coming. I mean, drones also being classified as robots, if I would, and AR, VR, which Mr. Karthik also just touched based on. Maybe it's a passing phase, But Mr. Balaji, at least in the oil and gas sector, do you foresee that these two technologies might stay for some time longer also?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to extend on what Mr. Karthik has said in terms of AR, VR, and how do we apply the technology, whether these technologies are for common use or specific industry use. Like one thing I would like to extend on the AR, VR is what we call as a computer vision.
Yes.
This computer vision, which is a combination of many things, but basically ability of the machine to differentiate between different objects. So we were having a discussion with a company which was designing a fully automated oil and gas rig.
Okay.
And one of the equipments they designed was a hat. It's a kind of helmet. The helmet is a safety equipment that is worn by people who are working in oil and gas installation and also in the construction industry. What they have done is like they have installed the cameras, and these cameras could be read from a remote area, and like they were also sort of giving them a warning and how the behavior of the people and how it is affecting. So this is just to give an example, and this can be simply extended to the number of people who are like going and riding motorbikes with a helmet every day. I mean, this is a simple helmet. Like these are some areas like if somebody wants to innovate, and these are something that they can look at. The other point in oil and gas, there are various aspects of oil and gas. The area that we focus more on is the study of the earth, like like what is beneath us, and like what are the different rock types, and how where is the oil and how we can extract it. So technology has evolved so much, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. We could rapidly assess and analyze huge volumes of data. I'm talking about like terabytes and terabytes of data in a very short period of time. And using like again a computer vision, what would have taken a human like maybe 3 months or 6 months, it can be done in minutes. So this is computer vision. I would definitely suggest to someone who is interested in doing more, and especially AR VR, like I already touched upon.
Yes.
This is having a lot of use cases because before you actually build infrastructure, you try to understand the cost aspect of it. Like there is a lot of ways you can optimize using the existing structures and simulating the environments and see like whether they are applicable in the industry. Because virtual reality is not new to oil and gas. We have been using virtual reality as way back as like 2005, 2006, where I remember I was working in Reliance. Reliance had one of the best virtual reality centers in India at that point of time. We could wear those goggles and go inside the earth, literally. And we could actually see those rivers that were flowing some millions of years before, and see whether there are some oil and gas is being stored there.
I understand.
So now that has become more democratized. I mean, that was sort of a technology
for a very niche few people and companies.
Yeah, so that's
too mainstream these days. Correct.
Yeah.
That is why I was particularly touching on this point with both Mr. Balaji and Mr. Karthik, in the interest of the audience also following this discussion. I mean, the takeaway point would also be is that we're talking about new technologies, at least in the short run. I mean, I'll come back to these as probably our closing remarks for the discussion, if I can permit. Is Mr. Balaji, what would you foresee would be some short-term plans on new technologies? Maybe by short-term, I would mean somewhere like an year, a couple of years down the line. And then maybe on a longer-term perspective, as per hype cycle, which one would be your emerging technologies that would come up? I mean, maybe from your perspective, Mr. Balaji, please.
Okay. So from our perspective, like what we are looking at is we use technology as an enabler. Yes. So what we are trying to do is like I'm talking purely from our industry point of view. Yes. Like we look at the existing processes and we see where we can bring the technology to like automate or like improve the efficiency. Like a lot of work we do is on what we call as mature fields. So
Yes.
mature fields are like this oil and gas fields that have been producing for a number of years, and they have a huge volume of data. But typically, this data is not being looked at the way it has to be.
Correct.
And but these fields do have a lot of low hanging fruits. So we bring in like AI and machine learning technology to quickly review like where are these opportunities. That's one area. The
Yes.
second is what we call is sort of like self-organizing maps, which is using like
SOMs. Huh?
SOMs, which is
Yes.
using like there is an artificial neural network,
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
mm,
Deep
so where
network,
we
deep
yeah
convolutional neural networks also
yeah
coming.
CNN yeah
I
so
mean, as
where
these days, data is the new oil, as they say, right?
yeah
And you come from oil and gas, where you have seen both the types of oils, the
exactly
tangible one and the
exactly
intangible one. And
yeah
that is
exactly.
what makes it more fun. Yeah, go on, please.
So what we have been doing is like we were like analyzing, let's say like uh, data that's so huge, like let's say a cube of like 10 kilometer by
Yeah,
like
we
5
understand.
kilometers, and
Correct.
so like multiple properties in those cubes, and we are trying to bring out maps which will tell us where are those sweet spots.
Correct. Correct.
So these are some of the cutting edge areas where the research is being done, and that is some
Sure,
of the areas we are also very actively working on.
sure, sir. So nice. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Balaji. I would
thank
go
you,
to
Mr.
Mr.
Badekar.
Karthik and ask the same question to him, if I can, is what are the latest technologies that he foresees that are coming in either at his startup, his incubation, innovation, accelerator mode at IIT Bangalore, and or what his discussions that have been might be happening with companies looking at futuristic technologies. I mean, I'm looking at a short-term thought process and maybe a longer-term thought process, please. Mr. Karthik, please.
So,
Yeah, go on.
yeah, so if you're asking me, of course, AI and decision sciences is one of the focus areas, and a lot of
Sure.
startups in the education space, we are working, with them in the AI decision sciences space. Also, like you said, even if you're looking at, for example, robotics, I mean, AI and decision sciences and data sciences play a very important role. And of course, like you said, augmented reality and virtual
Yeah.
reality is here to stay. But again,
Yeah, a little dicey.
goes
Yeah.
with the adoption,
Correct. Correct. Correct.
model. Of course, we are looking at working on various other fronts also, but predominantly, I would say, I mean, these are some of the technology per se. We are looking at these. But if you're looking at, I mean, it can be with different coding languages, or I mean, I'm not going to talk about apps.
Yeah, we understand.
Background technologies are per se these many, but
Correct.
it can have multiple applications. And as I said, healthcare, education, these are the one is we are strong at education, and a couple of folks and different institutions are looking at a lot of things
Correct.
in the healthcare domain, and we're looking at stuff in the agri domain also. So these three are the core focus areas, though we would love to look into more of environment and clean tech and infra.
Correct. Correct.
These three are focus as of now, but I would say environment, clean tech, and clean energy are the future. And there would be there's something called ecotech also that's coming up with a lot of people. So I mean, these are, and nowadays if you look at younger generation folks, I mean, they have their own things. See, if you're looking at, so I used to head the youth wing of Rotary at various levels, and I used to also head South Asia. So
Correct.
if you look at 10 years back, the focus was different, on civic projects and social service projects, and the focus has entirely changed. So the power of social media is so huge, and the power of information is so huge that a, a bunch of school kids or college kids can influence the government and various other companies and others to do things. So I would also say that I mean, we could sit and learn with the younger folks and
Definitely.
ask them I mean, many high school kids have developed innovative solutions now.
Yes,
What is it that's running in their mind for a future or a better India, right? For a greener or cleaner India, as we might call. I think we realized that, cleaning the Ganga was a very ambitious project, but COVID cleaned the Ganga for us, right?
completely true.
Completely.
Completely.
You could look at birds chirping when industry stopped. I think it was nature's call to clean or clarify.
Yes, eventually, yes, true.
So,
I mean, that probably was the reset button that the Almighty hit on the latest
Exactly.
technology that was required. True, true.
Exactly.
so I would say that if we can get into that mode, and let them, come forward and look at this. So, um, of course, everywhere there is a paradigm shift. If you look at politics and governance, many youngsters are looking at doing internships now with many MPs and many government officers. And of course, a lot of things have been changed or can be changed by them. So I would say, clean tech and, clean energy is here to stay. Of course, our traditional energy is needed to run, our planet. But
Correct.
I think everyone's innovating. From electric bikes to electric cars to the Ulus. You come to Bangalore, you ride a blue color Ulu. And you go from point to point, right? So all these things are, here to stay, and things are looking at it. As I said, again, if you look at the WEF report, there are many sectors that you can get into. But I would say, some of these which we had put in, like the information securities, the chatbots and the assistants, right? It can be auto-programmed. I would say chatbots are very integral now. Most of them have set up WhatsApp chatbots, but can you set up different chatbots? Not with WhatsApp. For
Correct.
different government agencies or nodal agencies, can you set up chatbots, right?
Correct.
And automation of factories. People think that automation, people will lose jobs, but to program, to make the robotics automative, you need a human brain, right? A robot can't automate a robot, right? So that's to see. And important thing that we're looking at is the record keeping and retrieval, I would say, right? Record keeping for a lot of us is still traditional. I know you can get marks cards online, but again, the people think that it can be faked. With a blockchain call, you as MIT can, for example, just say that, okay, this is verified. So the
Yes.
rest of verification should be with the record owner,
Correct.
right?
Sure, sir. Yes.
And I would say office productivity and tools. COVID has taught us the new norm. A lot of technologies, HTML, CSS, Java, and a lot of people are forced to learn a couple of things. It's here to stay. If you're telling me that the old technologies are gone, that's
Sure, I understand. Thank you, Mr. Karthik. Great. Mr. Praveen Patil, sir, would you want to come in here, sir? Or Dr. Khandekar, sir?
So what do I say? All these words of wisdom and experience which come from I would say, a deep background of both these professionals and Mr. Eman Rao, who had to leave a little early. I think we have immensely benefited by this discussion, and I have taken down my notes, and I hope my technical team has also recorded this session, and we will prepare a white paper based on these suggestions. Sir, it's my personal invitation. I know I'm going out of my professional this thing, but I'm tempted to invite you on my campus, taking this opportunity. Although professional, this is not correct in the panel discussion. I should make a mention of this. But going forward, MIT WPU and IMC Chamber would like to take and reap benefits of your extreme and rich knowledge and take it across India, because that's the motive with which we are organizing this series of webinars across India. And Bangalore and Chennai is the current ongoing series that we have. But whatever we have learned from you, we'll be taking it across India by writing a white paper on that. But I'm tempted, after listening to you for 1.5 hours, to invite you on my campus and have a personal interaction with you whenever the time permits. Sorry for crossing my professional limits and a little selfish here, but thank you so much for your wonderful interaction. And Professor Bedekar, I must thank you for keeping the session alive and interactive by asking very relevant questions throughout. Your questions were also pinpointed and thought-provoking for even panel members to give a very thoughtful answer to that.
Sure.
I
Thank you.
also would like to thank the IMC Chamber of Commerce for collaborating with us, the oldest Chamber of Commerce where Mahatma Gandhiji was a member, and it becomes a proud moment for all of us to get connected with IMC. It's good to see that a Chamber of Commerce coming forward, tying up with university like us, MIT World Peace University, and also trying to connect dots with government organizations. If three dots are connected well, I think as a India, we can reach our 5 trillion economy dream very soon. And I strongly believe that research and innovation will be the key for us to reach there. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Karthik Kittu to really spare time and come here for this online session. I would also like to thank Balaji Channakrishnan sir. I mean, really nice to listen to you. I would also on record thank Mr. M.N. Rao, although that he had some pressing engagement. But then thank you for him, to him also. I hope he might be able to see the recording somewhere down the line when he finds time. So I thank all the three panelists to really find time. And I would join in words with Dr. Khandekar to really invite both the panelists whenever you're traveling to this side of the country, or for that matter, please find time to come down, have a look at the campus and have a look at some practices that even we are following. Yes, we are on the right path or not. Your wisdom can definitely help us. And as you rightly said, we're going to join points together instead of doing it alone. If you can do it together, probably that would really get more benefits. Thank you, Mr. Karthik, again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to hand it over back to Anuja Palkar ma'am for the next steps, please. Anuja Palkar ma'am, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. I sincerely thank all the dignitaries for providing such insightful inputs. Going ahead with today's sessions, the next session is scheduled at 2:30 p.m. on best practices in R&D, India and other top 10 countries in R&D academic institutions to strengthen research and development within the university. So till then, you can all you can take a lunch break and come back for the session, and on the same link. Till then, this is Anuja Palkar signing off. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Karthik again. And thank you, Mr. Balaji.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hope to interact with you again, sir.
Yeah, definitely. It will be a pleasure.